Well, without further ado, an evening with Gary Pender.
Yeah. I carry a bucket of rocks around with me, so if I get too long-winded or too boring, everyone just starts throwing rocks, but I kind of let the day get away from me. I want to say this has been one of the most interesting projects that I've got involved with lately. And as I was just saying, the program I'm going to do tomorrow on cattle pens. I like to think of what happened to the Cherokees, similar to the apocalypse. Settlers didn't get in South Carolina supposedly until 1670. And here again, on dates, I don't take any date as gospel unless we have several people there at one time. Supposedly got landed in Charleston area, that's 1670. But within 100 years, we had managed to destroy almost all the Native Americans in South Carolina. And if you think about the four horsemen, the first one is the guy on the white horse, and in the biblical interpretation, it shows him as being someone, if you want to call him the fake Messiah or whatever, and he's able to bring miracles. He wrought miracles on the population. Well, that's pretty much what the whites did. You know, when they made contact with Cherokees, it would be almost like an alien from space coming down and showing these people things and saying, we've got this. We've got this. We can show you how to do this. We've got firearms, thundersticks, whatever you show. Same thing. They'd never seen anything like this. They were that astonished, I would imagine. The second horseman is war, famine. Well, we caused the wars. Through greed, we could hire one tribe to fight another one and sold those into slavery and so on and so forth. By 20 years after the first landings, the first settlements, the Cherokees are having bad experiences with the whites. Coming down the old trading path, either to Augusta, from there maybe to Savannah or Charleston time, they were being attacked, they were being robbed, they were being caught and sold into slavery. My only question is why these people were so long suffering as they actually were, because they were pretty warlike people. But they put up with this for quite some years. Disease. All the diseases that Europe had, we brought with us. Of course, the number one killer was smallpox. Smallpox came through South Carolina in 3 waves. By the end of the third wave, there was only somewhere in the neighborhood of 9,000 to 11,000 Cherokees left alive in all the states. Those that were left alive were pretty much starving even then. They had gotten into the fur business with Charleston and had actually killed out most of the wild game. And they were becoming more and more dependent on the women folk to provide the food that they needed. Now, they were great farmers by anyone's standards. They had thousands of acres under cultivation. They had peach orchards, they had apple orchards. And by the time of the Frigid Indian War, they'd begun to cultivate livestock a little bit. Okay. Now, when a stranger arrived in Charleston, and this guy was strange even by my standards. Okay, and his last name was Prager. I know you're aware of Mr. Prager. Now, Mr. Prager has, depending on who you talk to or who you read about, has a wild history about himself. He first arrived in Charleston, and he opened up some kind of store shop, something next to the shop of Henry Lawrence. Of course, Henry Lawrence County is named after him. We know that because there were ads that he put in the paper saying what he had available to sell. But the people in Charleston didn't take to him very much because, number one, it's my belief that they thought he was a Jesuit priest for some idea. He was an educated man, even by the standards of those days. Well, he hadn't planned on staying in Charleston. He come with a plan. Y'all read Rudyard Kipling, The Man Who Would Be King? Okay, this is Mr. Prager. He didn't want material wealth, he wanted influence, see? So he comes up to the Cherokees and he starts talking to them about this nation that they could develop, and it was going to be called the Kingdom of Paradise, I believe. Isn't that right? Kingdom of Paradise. And everyone was going to hold everything in common. It's going to be one huge commune, you know. And listen, he had a lot of influence. He convinced the Cherokee leader, notice I didn't say chief, leader, Moytoy, that he was going to be his ambassador at large, his prime minister, so to speak. And this guy was smart. He learned Cherokee, of course. Cherokee, by the way, had 3 different dialects. Okay? The one that the Cherokees that we had in this area, I said, spoke one dialect, the middle settlements another, and the overhill settlements even another. But ours has gone into history, so it's not around anymore. But he went to Tellico, so he learned the over-the-hill dialect. He not only learned it, but he developed a dictionary for him. This is how far advanced he was for the time. Had a lot of influence with me. He says, look, don't trust the British. They're thieves, they're liars, and they're greedy. You can't trust these people. You can't trust any Europeans, basically, except me. I ain't gonna lie to you guys, okay? So, of course, the British want to lay hands on him badly. They tried 3 times to catch him, and they couldn't catch him. Finally, they caught him down around Tallapoosa in Alabama, and they took him down and locked him up in Frederica, Georgia, and a year later, he died in prison under mysterious circumstances. They probably shot him, that's probably what happened, but anyway, I get a little bit ahead of myself. He arrived in the Cherokees in 1736. Well, 2 years later, the third epidemic of smallpox went through. He also convinced the Cherokees that the British were infecting them with smallpox deliberately. Now, you know, you could say, well, how far-fetched is that? Now, this gentleman over here does a lot of New England research, and he knows that the British have done that before. So saying that they were deliberately infected is not out of the realm of possibility. The way they did it in New England, I believe, was to give them blankets that were infected with the germs of smallpox. And of course, once it starts, there's no stopping it. Well, many things happened to the Cherokees, but that was one of the really big ones. They had never experienced anything like this last wave But this wave of smallpox started from the south, went north, and did something unusual. It turned around and went to the other direction. When it got back down the coast, it started infecting the people in Charleston. It was taken into Charleston. They panicked, literally. They said, oh, we got to keep this out of here. If we're going to live, we got to keep it out of here. So they wouldn't let any of the refugees from the French and Indian War come into Charleston because they thought he was bringing smallpox, which indeed they were. Indeed they were. Now, this is just an amazing story to me anyway. We have all these things going on at one time. Okay? We've got smallpox epidemic. We've got, of all things, this guy, a minister, goes nuts, literally, in Charleston, and he starts running around the streets, and imagine how small Charleston would have been at this time, shouting that the world was coming to an end, that this was judgment of God, and that everybody was going to die. Only in America and only in South Carolina could something like this happen. And he was a licensed minister, which meant a lot in those days. Apparently he just went out of his mind, but he wrote a book about it, foretelling what day the world's going to end and all this stuff. Well, you can imagine the small as Charleston was, everybody had to hear this man, right? I mean, where would you be living that you didn't hear this guy? Because he was up and down the streets night and day screaming this stuff. Well, they finally got him shut up and out of there. In the meantime, this free black, whose last name was Prince, he decides that what he needs to do is organize the black folks so that they could attack the whites. So they're running around in what's now Beaufort County trying to catch this guy. Now, to me, this is like a normal day in the USA anymore. We've got so much going on nowadays. But you can imagine they didn't have any communication with England. It took weeks. They didn't know what in the world was going on. They got this Prager guy up here telling them the Cherokees, you know, don't deal with anybody but him. They got plagues, you know, listen, they had approximately 70,000 slaves in South Carolina. The slave population was larger than Native American. They were caught between two rocks. They didn't want to go to war with the Cherokees, pull out their militia to attack the Cherokees because who were going to protect them from the slaves? Everybody was up in the woods fighting the Cherokees. Can you imagine that kind of situation? Plus everybody's dying from smallpox. Getting a little bit ahead of myself there, but in any event, the Cherokees came down in 1750. They talked to Governor Glenn. They talked to all these people in government and said, look, all we want, honest traders, we want the settlers to stay out of our area. They ended up making a little treaty, which is probably, has proved, worth less than the paper is written on, saying that the settlers would stay south of Long Canyon. Well, of course, it didn't work like that because the settlers didn't pay any attention. So, that wasn't bad enough. They're being kidnapped, they're being sold into slavery, they're dying of disease. They've killed off so many animals, deer in particular, that they're running out of food. Okay? Everybody's sick and not able to farm. But it's just, it was like the apocalypse today. Now, of course, by the time they got back up to the lower villages, lower towns, circumstances have already changed again. They don't know what the Charlestonians are going to do. They don't know what the British are going to do. They know what they want. But what they want doesn't have anything to do with anything. So, continued on this way, they were being treated. And if I took a deer skin to this gentleman and I sold it to him, traded it to him, he might give me so much cloth. If I gave it to him, he might not give me but half that amount. But claimed they're all giving the same amount. But the Cherokees weren't dumb. So they went back down again, give us some kind of standard measurements. Does anybody remember when we used to have a bureau in our government called the Bureau of Weights and Measurements? That was a really important thing. When you went somewhere, if you bought a gallon of milk, you got a gallon. If you bought a pound of coffee, you got a pound. Anybody look at the boxes nowadays? We're being cheated right and left on everything. I sometimes wonder if a gallon is a gallon when you're buying gas. Who knows? You know? Cherokees were in that very same fix. They came back up again after meeting with the governor. Things are going to change. Well, they changed all right. They got worse. And yeah, we went from talking about going from bad to worse. They literally went from bad to worse. Well, they went in and they said, look, maybe if you were to build a couple of forts in our country or in our land, we could control all these different groups. Well, South Carolinians won't afford that, except for one thing. They didn't want to spend the money. Does this sound familiar? It would have been great good for the public, but no. They couldn't, the rich folks in Charleston couldn't get it themselves together enough to say, yeah, let's just get this money in there. We won't have to worry about, you know, the Indians attacking us and then the blacks reacting and all this kind of stuff. But it took them years to work this out. Literally years. And bad trade was still going back and forth. By this time, there's a firm in Augusta that thought it was a good idea to start selling the Cherokees rum. We'll give you rum for your skins. Well, of course, all heck broke loose then. There was no controlling anything. The British, always playing one tribe against another, furnished the Creeks down in Georgia with more powder and more guns and more lead than they had had before. So what did the Creeks do? Now whether the British connived this or not, who knows? But the Creeks started attacking the lower Cherokee towns from the south. Okay. Then the northern Indians, the Mohawks and Shawnee and all these, started attacking the Cherokee towns in the north and in Virginia. They are being beset all around by different enemies with different goals. But the one thing all had in mind, they wanted to control the fur trade, and if that meant getting rid of the Cherokees to do it, we'll get rid of the Cherokees. Well, things just went on and on. And I read all this stuff, you know, and I looked through the record, read General Amherst dispatches, and all. Does not someone in there have a lick of common sense at all to try to stop some of this? You know, we could get along, we could actually better ourselves by trying to stop some of this constant raiding back and forth. One of the problems was that the Cherokees didn't have a central governing body. If all the people in this room were from different villages, you'd all have a different idea of how it was to be done. Look at our own delegates where was that? Philadelphia during the war, trying to hammer out what we were going to do. And these were educated people living in close proximity. Well, what about the Cherokees and all these different valleys and hill towns and all this stuff, trying to give consensus about what they could do? And every village had its own people arguing about what they thought should be done. In essence, nothing was getting done. It just got worse and worse and worse. There were three men that I like to think had good sense. One was a guy named Ludvico Grant. Is that what his name?
I don't know that.
Yeah. He was an Indian trader, but he could see what was happening. And he kept sending messages to Charleston, to the governors, and said, these people are not going to tolerate this forever. We're forcing them into a box that they are going to have to react to. They're going to have to if they want to survive. It's not a question of politics. It's not a question of greed, but they're going to have to react to survive. Well, so Governor gets with the council then, and one of his big impediments was Christopher Gadsden. Christopher Gadsden couldn't have got along with the devil. I mean, he couldn't. He would party with the devil, literally. Well, he was always a thorn in everybody's side. But so anything that was proposed, he was against. And he had a lot of influence. Well, finally, it was agreed that they would build a fort, Fort Prince George, named, incidentally, was named after, as the French would say, the Dauphin, the next King George III. That's who the fort was named after. And then one up in Tennessee, what was to be Tennessee, Colorado. Okay. So they sent folks up to build the fort, and it was, I'm painting myself all over. It was a catastrophe from word go. Have you ever read the description of the first mountain? Yeah, it was like 3 feet high. That's what it was, 3 feet high. I mean, in time they developed more, but that's what it was at the beginning. And instead of controlling the traders, as it was supposed to have done, eliminated the Cherokees having to come all the way to South Carolina or Augusta to trade their furs, it did just the opposite. It created problems for them. The number one problem being that when the Cherokees made this agreement for the fort, especially Fort Prince George, their understanding was that they were leasing an area of land 200 feet wide that would run from Fort Prince George to 96. Well, the British view of the thing was that they were giving them all the land from Fort Prince George to 96. Now, when the Cherokees found out how they had been bamboozled, you can imagine the reaction. Okay. They didn't go to war yet. Okay. When the French and Indian War started, the Virginia authorities came to the Cherokees and said, we're friends. We've got you guys' interest at heart. If you will come and fight with us against the northern tribes, we'll give you all of this trade goods. We'll ensure that you won't have settlers coming into your land and so forth. And these poor, blighted people believed him. So they sent several hundred warriors up to Virginia. And the British and the colonial authorities were so inept that what they were doing, they were supposed to get this huge army together, and they were supposed to move up towards the fort, like Ticonderoga in that area, and subdue the French. They could never get it together. None of the colonies wanted to give money for this. None of them wanted to send their men. So the Cherokees are there waiting to go. They're not being paid. They're not being given the trade goods that they supposed. In other words, they're not getting anything out of the deal. And on top of that, they're starving to death. Okay? So there was this continual coming and going. You can understand the men would get there. And mind you, at this time, the Cherokees only had about 3,000 warriors. That's how much they had shrunk down as a nation. If you got 800 warriors up there, that's quite a commitment. What's happened to their families at home? Going hungry. Okay? They could never get the British and the colonists all together and moving. So then they decided, well, we'll just send the Cherokees out on raids, raiding these French and their allies, the Indian allies. They did that. Did that for a while, and then they gave up and said, we can't do this anymore. You know, our families are not being taken care of. You're not giving us anything. Said, we're not getting paid. To heck with you guys, we're going home. So they headed back down towards Carolinas, Virginia. Well, the Virginia frontiersmen decided that what they needed to do was to kill the Indians that they had on hand. The Indians they had on hand were the Cherokees. So they attacked the Cherokees at different points, and they killed about 40 of them. They stole their horses, anything that could be done was done. Well, when these men get back to their towns and tell their own people how they've been put upon by the Virginians, which they didn't like anyway, they wanted to go to war right then. And I can't see that I blame them. But they decided, no, before we do this, we're going to send another delegation down to Charleston to talk to the people again. And they did. Well, South Carolina had just got another governor named, and I just call him Governor Lye, because only the British would come up with a name like Lyleton. That's my closest pronunciation. I just call him Governor Lye. Now, Governor Lye was an idiot on foot. Okay? So he decides that he's going to raise this army, and they're going to go up and subdue the Cherokees once and for all. Okay? We're going to just get rid of them. We're getting these tales that they've been attacking the Virginians. Who could blame them? So he gets this bunch of militia together, and one of the men was Milton, the Milton plantation. Okay. That's another character. So they start up, and they've got the militia with them. And here again, the militia are not being paid. They're not being uniformed. They're hardly being fed. And they're trying to walk from Charleston to Fort Prince George. Okay? Well, the Cherokees that had come down to meet with Governor Lye were going to go back with them. They were going to go back in a group. Somewhere along the way, probably down around Congress, Columbia, if you want to say, the governor decided to ensure that the Cherokees wouldn't attack them, that they needed to hold this group of Cherokees as hostage for good behavior of the other Cherokees. Well, of course, someone got away. And when they got away and they beat the militia and the British soldiers to the Cherokee towns, you can imagine what happened. They're holding our folks hostage. I mean, you know, remember how incensed everyone got when, and I'm not saying they shouldn't have, but when our embassy staff was held in Iran? Well, you can imagine. They know that the settlers won't hesitate to kill them. No? Anyway, his whole expedition turned out to be an absolute disaster. They ended up locking up some of these Cherokees at Fort Prince George. Supposedly good conduct for the rest. Well, they had a change of commanders at Fort Prince George. The old guy wrote the British government, he wrote the authorities in Charleston, and he said, if you don't stop these unscrupulous traders, this trash is what he called them, border trash, he said, this is going to lead to nothing but increased trouble. Government did nothing. They didn't even reinforce Prince George, because by the time this militia got there, they were in such bad shape they had to be held back to Charleston. When the Cherokees went on the warpath, if you will include that, in 1758, during the height of the Frigid Indian War, they had just cause. Their idea, they were going to come down and they were going to sweep all the whites right out of the country. That actually got all the way to Columbia, what's Columbia now, Reagan. People in Charleston went crazy. We got to do something now. So that's when they contacted General Amherst through the British government, and he sent a Scotsman down here with his regular army troops. They're going to go up to Fort George, clear out the Cherokees around there, and then they're going to go over the mountains and clear out the Cherokees up in Tennessee. Well, of course, it didn't work like that. The Cherokees weren't dumb. They knew they were coming. This Scotsman managed to burn the lower towns that we know of, like Tugaloo and Seneca and Estatola and all these. But when he got on up towards what's now Franklin, North Carolina, there was a pass that he had to go through. And all the Cherokee fighting men had got together there, and they were waiting for them. And of course, when the Scots tried to force the pass, they were attacked. Cherokees weren't dumb. They went around, come up behind them, and attacked the British supply train, because they knew if they attacked the British supply train, the British would turn around and go the other way. And they did. It's a big victory for them. The Cherokees, probably the biggest one they ever had. You know? Well, that didn't settle them down at all. Well, one of the militiamen with this group was a friend of Christopher Gadsden named Middleton. Middleton was a pretty influential guy. Well, he wasn't worth a flip as a militiaman. He didn't have any military training. His people, for the most part, weren't even armed. It was just a mob. But he, to get influence, he decided he would go back, because they weren't going to let the Cherokees win. They get in touch with Amherst again. Amherst decides, this is the British general, he decides that the wrong commander was in charge. That the man that needs to be in charge was a Lieutenant Colonel Grant. Okay. He sends Grant down to South Carolina. Grant didn't want to go. He was having his hands full of New England. He did not want to come to South Carolina. But he came to England. He was a good soldier. And he told the Charleston authorities, and he told Amherst, he said, the Cherokees have got legitimate gripes. It's not because they hate us. It's not because they're greedy. It's because everything's being so poorly managed. Same story. He gets to Charleston. They don't want to furnish any men because they're afraid the slaves are going to revolt. So, after middling delays again and again and again, finally started moving north. Well, Grant's not an idiot. When he gets to outside Franklin, he puts his Indian allies out front, so they'll know they can find the Cherokees where they're at on this. So he forced the pass. He went to what is now to downtown Franklin. Have you been to see the mound there in downtown Franklin? Well, the Cherokees thought that that was actually the birth of their nation was there. Okay. So when the British took that, then it was like dominoes, everything began to fall. This wasn't the end of the fight, but that was the end of the major portion of the fight. And would you believe, after having lost almost everything, the Virginia authorities go back to the Cherokees and say, well, you know, we're still fighting the northern Indians, so if you'll come and help us again, we'll pay you. They did it. Mainly, I guess, because their families were starving and they didn't have a choice. You know, if you don't have any resources, you grasp at straws. They went north again. This was in the spring. They told the Virginia authorities, they told the British government, we have to be home by fall because we've got to go hunting to provide for our families. Well, that was in the spring, like April. Would you believe that come November, the British and the colonies still hadn't got together? And the Cherokees were just sitting there waiting. Isn't that incredible? That you'd put upon people this much and still not come forward with what you said you would give them. Now, it's not a fact that they didn't have it. They just didn't want to get off their billfold and pay for it. They thought somehow they were going to get this protection for free. After all, it was just a Cherokees and they got killed. Who mattered? Cherokees turned around, came home again. Same thing happened again. They were robbed and killed and all this kind of stuff away. When they get home, what do they find? They find that some of the officers, not enlisted men, but some of the officers in Fort Prince George were raping the Cherokee women. Okay. Now, in Cherokee culture, rape is something that was not done. They were a matrilineal society, which meant that the women had a great deal of control. The women were very well respected. They were consulted on everything, including war. And to have someone rape them, that was like an insult to everything. The Cherokees went to the fort and said, give us these people. Of course, they're not going to do that. Cherokees got together again. They came down. They laid siege to Fort Prince George and to Fort Loudon. Well, by this time, they've grown so weak in themselves from war, from disease, from starvation. There wasn't much left, but they maintained the siege for quite a while. One of the officers in the fort came out for whatever reason, was fired upon, was killed. Supposedly this incensed people in the fort. I'm not sure about this. I don't know why any human would do that if you were being besieged. But supposedly they cut a hole and brought these prisoners up, the same hostages now that had been locked up since Governor L had come up from Charleston. They killed them in front of the Cherokees, all of them. Unarmed, killed them. Well, you can imagine the reaction to that. Well, they really did go to war with them. Here again, don't blame them. They did capture Fort Loudon. Fort George held out. Someone decided. Now, through all this, we got to bear in mind what the Cherokee philosophy of life was, and that was that everything is a balance. You know, if I take this gentleman here and I kill him, or I kill one of his family, okay, they are duty bound to kill me or to kill a member of my family. They don't want to kill more than that. They just want to get the scale back in balance again. Well, there were so many of them killed, they could never get anything back in balance. It just simply wasn't going to happen. The raping the women, I just never did understand. And who do you think the Charleston authorities decided this man's advice that they needed to take was one of the officers that had been doing pretty. He could tell them how to handle the Cherokees. Finally, the Cherokees did give up. I got ahead of myself again. When they took Fort Loudon, they were going to march prisoners back down to Fort George and say, okay, I brought you the guys from Loudon, y'all pack up and get out. somewhere along the line, the Cherokees decided, or some of them decided, to kill the officers from Fort Loudon. So one morning, return, they did just that. They killed some officers and took everybody prisoner. They didn't kill that many, they just took a lot of them prisoner. At the end of the war, a lot of them returned back to the British Army and to the militias. I don't know why they would want anyone to live, frankly. But by this time, they are in such bad shape. I just don't, I can't comprehend it. But through all this, somehow they managed to recover enough so that at the end of the Frigid and Indian War, they kind of regrouped themselves as much as they could. There couldn't have been many of them left. I don't see how they could have been. If they started out, you know, by 1738, there was only 7,000 to 9,000 left, or 9,000 to 11,000, whatever. 15 years later, how many could have been left? But, of course, in 1776, they did fight the South Carolinians again, and of course lost again. But in all this mess, if there was ever a patriot, it was a Cherokee, and his name was Dragon Canoe. Are you all aware of the story of Dragon Canoe? His father was a politician. Had a Coca-Cola would fit right in with that mob up in D.C. today. He would fit right. He could do anything. They call him now the Coca-Cola, which meant little carpenter, because he could put political deals together, and he was always trying to play the British to make him the head man, and then he could negotiate with all the others. Well, it was an out-and-out lie. They didn't even like him. And he had to hide out part of the time because the Cherokees would kill him. But his son was just the opposite. And his son fought the whites all of his natural life. He took his band of Cherokees and he moved them all the way over to Chattanooga, around Chickamauga area that he lived in. But they finally caught him in the village, and John Sevier, known as Chucky Jack, finally caught Dragon Canoe, and he was shot and killed. But he didn't give up easily. I mean, they owned all the land from the Ohio River to Columbia, east to what's now West Virginia, almost all the way to Memphis. And it ended up with that little patch up there in Cherokee now, on the east side. Of course, then Telequa for the western band. But I tell you this, the Native Americans done one thing right. They started us to smoking. They killed more white eyes with smoke than anything else. Nicotine kills, folks. They did that well. But folks, that's about all I have. I hope it's been of interest. Some of the characters that I come across, the crazy preacher down in Charleston said the sky is falling, and then the black guy takes up the belt from him and goes around, and just the political Grant, the British officer, actually gets into a duel with Middleton. He gets into a duel with this, and he didn't want to. He tried to avoid the man, but Middleton just put him down. Wrote about him in the newspaper, got up in their so-called assembly and criticized Grant. And Grant actually wrote General Amherst and says, I've done everything I can to try to avoid this. Well, Middleton catches him out one day and hits him with his walking cane, which meant they had to be a duel. I never did quite get the circumstances correct. It's my understanding that Middleton fired and missed, and then Grant looked at him, pointed his pistol in the air and pulled the trigger and said, "Now this is over. This is silly. Let's just get out of here." You know, he should have killed him, so he solved a lot of problems on down the road. But Gadsden decided that this wasn't the end of it. And some of the sources I read said that all the agitating that Gadsden did against the British Crown was because of this incident. Think of that. And I'm thinking, and Henry Lawrence, who grew up with him, Henry Lawrence said, he's deranged. He's deranged, he can't get along with anyone. And his idea, Gadsden, was to take all the leaders of the Cherokees, give them a feast and kill them. Sort of like Indian Vespers, you know, like the Sicilian Vespers, kill off all the major gangsters. He just want to kill all the Cherokee. Henry Lawrence said, we can't do that. We're supposed to be civilized. You know? Just amazing. Just amazing. As I said, tomorrow I'll be at the main library. But there's one character, I don't know if you've run across this guy. When I found this, and I started looking about him, the Tory, David George, he was the one, okay, he had, and I never did get this straight, a wife and a sister-in-law who was staying at Princess Fort, and which is up towards Lawson Spark now, off of 85, Spartanburg County. But they were feeding him information, and he was relaying it to Cornwallis. I thought, so I started, well, let me see if I can find out more about this guy. And it turns out, I run this thing down, maybe coincidence, I don't know, but there was a slave in Virginia. His name was David George. Instead of running north when he ran away, he ran south and came to South Carolina. And finally ended up being evacuated when Charleston finally surrendered and going to Nova Scotia. And I can't help but wonder, was this the same guy? You know, was this, because he caused them, accidentally, he caused them all kinds of problems because he gave wrong information to Cornwallis. And it sent Tarleton on a wild goose chase. But just, I mean, isn't that amazing? Don't you find that amazing that this man could have done all this stuff and it all just comes together some way? Some way. I ran across a veteran's record. This poor man, at Cowpens, he was chopped across the top of the head with a cavalry saber, split his skull open. They said you could see his brain membrane. Okay. When he fell to the ground, a Highlander came up and bayoneted him in the chest, broke some of his ribs. And I guess this was just in ways, and the Highlander moved on. And then here comes the Scots officer with one of them claymores and tries to hack his leg off. He lives. Without any medical treatment, he lives. And his sister kept a part of his skull as a souvenir of what happened to him. Not only did he live, he fought in the War of 1812. He was 50 when he enlisted. Now that's veteran service right there. But there's just so many stories out there. Thank you all for letting me bore you for an hour. When I get a captive audience, y'all can't get like, you can unlock that door now. But really, I'm thinking, Lord, you know, all we got to do is, what was a guy out there in Los Angeles got beat up by the cops? Rodney King. Can't we all just get along? I mean, you know, don't try to shoot me, I ain't gonna try to shoot you. I'm telling you. And to think that they own the gambling casinos now? Huh. Y'all know who owns Carol Williams? I bet you do. The Catawbas own Carol Williams. Sean Berman said they were never a tribe. Probably the only Indian tribe in North America that never fought against the whites. And Sean Berman says, well, I don't recognize them as being a tribe. Of course, he didn't recognize that black children either, but that's not the story. Anyway, thank you all very much.